What's going on, guys? Welcome back to this episode of Restoration with Vic. For today's episode, we get another pair of Travis Scott Air Jordan 1s, this time with one of the nastiest scratches I've ever seen on a sneaker before. The original owner of these hit me up on Instagram, explaining to me that he was parking his motorcycle in the garage, and when he was closing the door, there was a big nasty nail sticking out, and it just completely carved a big slash across the toe box. So today we're going to be going in depth and show you guys how to properly remove a deep scratch on the leather and suede. So without further ado, let's get it started. I hate to see a scratch this bad on a sneaker like this, and I'm sure the original owner of these is even more devastated. It's gonna be really hard to get it back to 100% factory, but there is ways to make it more presentable. It's gonna require a little bit of sanding, shaving, filling, painting, but I'm sure at the end it's gonna look a lot better than this. Let's take out our shoelaces and insert our shoe tree. Shoe tree's in place. If you have a nasty scratch on the toe box just like this, it helps to have a shoe tree in place so you can apply pressure on the toe box when you're sanding and filling. Now we're gonna grab some scissors and cut all the harsh pieces of leather that's sticking up. All done with this step, it's very important to chop off anything that's hanging loose because it's just gonna get in the way. For this next step, we're gonna be using the sandpaper method. We're gonna be using 400 grit, 800 grit, and 1500 grit. We're gonna start out with the lowest, which is 400 grit, to start smoothing out this rough texture. Once it starts to get smooth, we can move on to the 800 grit. Once it's starting to get smoother, we'll finish it off with the 1500 grit. Quick tip, whenever you guys are using sandpaper on leather, make sure you guys go in a circular motion to avoid shredding up the leather. So far so good, you guys. I already used the 400 grit, now we're in the middle of using the 800 grit. It's looking a lot smoother right now, but it's nowhere near perfect. We're gonna continue using the 800 grit to get it a lot smoother. The idea is to get it as smooth as possible before we move on to the filling process. Alright guys, we're all done using the 1500 grit. This looks a lot better than I expected just by using sandpaper. Before we can move on to the filler, we're gonna move on to the suede first. A few months ago, I did a restoration on this exact shoe for J Collector. On the back, it had a nasty scratch similar to this one in the front. For that step, we just used sandpaper, same exact way we got rid of the scratch on the toe box. We're gonna start off with using 400 grit, 800 grit, and 1500 grit. This step isn't gonna look 100% perfect, but it's gonna look a lot better than what it is now. Change of plans, you guys. I'm using the 400 grit right now and it's taking forever. We are making some progress, but the line is still noticeably there. So what we're gonna do to save some time and hopefully it makes some better progress is grab our Dremel. For this, we're just gonna go at it very gently. We don't wanna create any dips or holes inside the suede. All done using the Dremel, the suede does look a lot better. That deep scratch that was once there isn't quite as noticeable anymore. It's just blended in with the rest of the suede. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what it was. Now onto the toe box. Before we can do anything, we gotta do some prep work. We're gonna tape off the suede area before we start laying down our leather filler. But first, let me grab my brand new air gun to blow off any debris. Now we're on to the fun stuff. To fill in this deep scratch, we're gonna be using some white Leather World Technologies leather filler. I highly recommend this stuff. You can buy it in different colors. Simply what we're gonna do is grab our spatulas and start filling in the deep scratch. We wanna be very careful and start off with a thin coat and work our way up. We don't wanna get any of the stuff inside the holes. Let's just get the process going. So far so good. We got about 5 coats of leather filler inside the deep scratch. It's starting to even out with the rest of the leather. Remember, when you guys are using this stuff, don't cake it on and try to rush the process. you want to start with thin coats and work your way up. Right now what we're going to do is grab some sandpaper, 800 to be specific. We're going to start smoothing it out before we lay down another coat. We're about 75% there. I filled it in, sanded it down. Right now it's really smooth, but at this point it's really about seeing and feeling. What I feel right now is I can still slightly feel a slight bump there. That means I gotta go in and add a couple more coats. Once the coats are on there, we'll resand. It's looking great so far. Took some time to get it to this point. It was a lot of filling and sanding. Took about 3 different sessions. Remember, when using this stuff, you guys want to apply thin coats and sand very lightly. Also, make sure you guys are letting this stuff dry. If you guys start sanding while it's still wet, it's just gonna come right off. Now for this next step, I've done a lot of sanding in this area. It's a little too smooth compared to the rest of the tumbled leather. It's gonna be hard to replicate the tumbled leather in this area, but we're gonna do our best. For this, we got some scrap tumbled leather. We're gonna apply some leather filler in a small area. Dab it onto the toe box where I did a lot of sanding, let it dry. Once it's fully dried, we're gonna grab some 1500 grit sandpaper and lightly sand the rough areas. Good to go with that step. Now before we start pinning, there's one more detail we gotta take care of. From all the sanding I did on the front of the toe box, one of the holes got pretty blurry, so we're gonna grab a soldering tool with the pointy tip and clean it up very, very, very carefully. On to the final step, laying down the paint on the toe box. For this custom mix, it was super easy. I just mixed up some white, cream, and mist. We're gonna lay it down using an angular brush. Paint job's complete, really easy stuff, only took a few coats to get it nice and solid. Now anytime I do a paint job, right before the last coat, I like to grab some 1500 grit sandpaper and sand it down to get rid of any little bumps or debris. Then I hit it with the final coat to get a nice flat paint job. Off camera, I went ahead and sprayed the toe box with some Crawler matte finish to protect the paint job. That's very important with any paint job. Now let's go ahead and lace the shoe up. Alright guys, that is going to bring us to an end on this restoration on how to properly remove a deep scratch from leather and suede. This isn't one of my crazy customs or restoration videos, I get it, but it is very important to know how to properly remove a deep scratch from leather. It happens quite often on a small scale or a big scale, such as this big scratch. For this shoe, the scratch on the leather was really deep. All the little pieces were sticking out. I had to go in with the little scissors, chop all those pieces off. Had to do a lot of sanding on the shoe to get it nice and smooth. After that, we filled it in with some leather filler, did some more sanding, filled it, sanded, filled it, sanded. Once that was good to go, I grabbed a scrap piece of tumbled leather, laid some leather filler on it, put it back on the shoe to give it that texture. That way it wouldn't be fully smooth with the rest of the tumbled leather. After that, I grabbed the soldering tool, went back and cleaned up all the little holes to make them a lot sharper after all the sanding I did on the toe box. And of course, we used the Dremel to blend in the scratch with the rest of the suede. All in all, I'm really happy with how this toe box turned out. You can't even see the scratch at all. Now it's time to send these back to the original owner. Hopefully he stays away from that death trap of a garage. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is Vick Almighty. I'll catch you guys next Monday. See you guys.